Welcome to Autopia, Episode 3. Look me in the eye, young man. Welcome to Episode 3 of Autopia, in which we're going to look at how language developed among the population of this majority neurodivergent world. We're going to mainly focus on the differences in the way autistic people develop language in this world. In the previous episode, we looked at a story focusing on two autistic individuals and their allistic ally, if you'll pardon the wordplay, overcoming a problem, trying to kill a water buffalo using merely a spear in order to bring an end to food shortages in their home country of Raat, after the ruler of Raat's neighbour to the south, Kushala, Hekahekama, started hoarding the salt. If you listened back to that episode, which came out 6 months ago. Almost. Well, no, it has been over 6 months now, if you're listening to this in real time. I want to talk about language in Autopia. The languages that these characters speak, and some major and influential languages throughout this world's space-time continuum. So that's what we're going to do today. So I guess our first question is, how did humans develop language? As we understand it nowadays, and I say this to you using the thing we're talking about now, language. Ooh, how meta. We have several theories going around about how humans develop language. The first of our theories about where language started out is that it started, as you might expect, by people making sounds. As you might expect, humans began by making sounds that imitated things around them, such as animal sounds, sounds from nature, and the sounds of tools bashing against a rock. Like the famous metal pipe sound effect. If you know, you know. Well, not quite as extreme as that. The point is, over time, these sounds developed into words. Another way in which human communication evolved in its early stages was through gestures, pointing and making faces, and through evidence such as bonding theory, which became necessary once we needed new ways to bond other than physical. So another question is, how does language differ among autistic people, as it does for neurotypical people in our world? In order to form this idea of how autopians, quote-unquote, as they're colloquially referred to here on Earth, we need to remind ourselves of how autistic people typically think, and how their brains work. As, in order to plant the seeds for language to develop, we need to go back to how brains work for the citizens of our world. As a refresher for episode 1, autistic brains have a slightly greater amount of disconnect in communication between the two hemispheres, left and right, as well as more folding, that's wrinkles. In terms of how to set the stage for language to develop, this is where it gets a little interesting. Obviously, we know autism is a spectrum, and when researching this topic in order to find possible ways in which this could go, I found some information and perspectives that bent my mind a little bit. Not to brag myself, but in my own life, and as far back as I can remember, I found language comprehension and using it has come fairly natural to me. But that's certainly not the case for all spectrum folks. Learning about this has certainly made me think about my own brain structure a little. I feel like it's fairly well known among neurotypical folk in our world that common traits of autism include difficulty with social cues and literal interpretation of things like sarcastic quips such as, "Silence is golden, duct tape is silver," and, "I'm busy right now, can I ignore you some other time?" When it comes to the variety of the different ways in which autistic people speak, some are hyperverbal, meaning they can talk for sometimes hours, often about special interests or hyperfixations. Some autistic people are also non-verbal or non-speaking. This will apply to Autopia as well, which I'm very interested and excited to flesh out. So, a question arises. What languages do our Raashan friends speak? Amunet, Sekani, and Neferet. As you may remember from our last episode, Raat is a nation in Autopia, basically the equivalent of ancient Egypt around 3,000 years ago from the present day. We will cover more time periods and places on this show, I promise. In case you're unaware, the ancient Egyptians spoke Egyptian, surprise surprise. a now dead language which was written for more than 4,000 years, actually being the longest continuously attested language in the world. This is unlike modern Egyptians who speak Arabic. Well, it's often more practical to refer to it as Egyptian Arabic, but that's a whole can of worms unto itself. Let's look at some of the languages that our friends from the last episode speak. The country of Ra'at is vast, slightly larger than modern-day Egypt in our timeline, although not by much. Containing 3 major languages, but as in many instances, not all languages are created equal. In fact, few languages are created at all. The primary language in Ra'at is known as Nebuhek. It's the official and most widely spoken language, used in government, religious ceremonies, trading, and daily communication. In ancient Egypt in our timeline, the Egyptian language was written in hieroglyphs for religious and monumental inscriptions, and in a more simplified demotic script, which was used for everyday use. However, the key difference in the language between Autopia and our timeline is that there is only one script in use, because who needs 2, right? That's just impractical. I'll be honest myself, I'm very far removed and far from qualified to speak authoritatively on ancient languages from 4,000 years ago, spoken in a place far from where I've ever been. However, I've observed this to be the case in other languages, with similar differentiation between scripts for reasons relating to social constructs. See what I just did there? Social constructs. Many autistic people don't really care so much for those. From my own experience, it just comes down to not understanding how neurotypical minds work, which is basically lesson 0 if you're trying to show a neurotypical who's never even met or seen an autistic person what the typical autistic experience is like. Anyway, back to the task at hand, and that's languages. So, the primary language of Nebuhek, spoken in Ra'at, uses only the demotic script. If you're familiar with modern Arabic writing, it looks a little bit like that, except that in Ra'at, it's carved into stone, as printing is still incredibly primitive, only being invented around 1,000 years ago by the Sumerian and Proto-Elamite civilizations. Some more facts about Nebuhek include: it's rich in consonants with emphatic sounds, which are sounds which are given a little more stress than others around them, such as in English, we have k and g, that's the K and G sounds. It uses, as linguists would call, a VOS word order, with VOS standing for verb, subject, object. Now, if that's all a bunch of linguistababble to you, let's break it down. If you're listening to this podcast, then you probably understand at least some English, so I'll use that as an example.
You do understand English. This isn't that complex.
English has a fairly fixed SVO word order. Now, what that means is that basically, especially in basic sentences, the subject of the sentence comes first, then the verb, then the object. A basic example would be, the dog catches the ball. The dog is the subject, that's the performer of the action. Catches is the verb, that's the doing word, as I'm sure you were taught in primary school. And the ball is the object of the sentence. That's the thing that's being performed on, or the thing that's being caught. Nebuhek is like that, just in a different order, with the verb coming first, then the object, then the subject, like, catches the ball the dog. Or, a more fitting example might be, hunt the buffalo we shall. As well as having highly inflected nouns, showing grammatical case, possession, and plurality. Nebuhek is the primary language of Ra'at, providing mostly uniformity in the sense of one country, one language. Wow, I feel like such a nationalist as I write this. But as in many cases, even in Autopia, this is just not true, as there is in fact another language in this nation. It's known as Medjait, and it's spoken by the Medjay ethnic group in the south of Ra'at, close to the border with Kushala and in Kushala itself. The language features short, clipped syllables for quickie communications, which, as you can imagine, is very easy when out on the battlefields. There are some interesting things to talk about on the war front. See what I did there? in Autopia, but we'll save that for a future episode. If you're wondering, Amunet and Zakani don't speak a lick of Medjait, only knowing some loan words which are commonplace in Raat, mostly relating to military activity. It's a real shame that on their journey to kill the water buffalo they didn't run into anybody that spoke it. Hey guys, this is Sam here. Before we end today's episode, I have a bit of unscripted rambling, not exactly ramblings, but an unscripted kind of message for you. So as I say this, it's currently the 2nd of March 2025 at about 5 in the morning, and I can't sleep because I'm doing a 10k run in the morning. Yeah. And I've had some thoughts about the future of this show. This is completely unscripted, by the way, I haven't written any of this down. So I've been thinking about shifting the focus of this show from less of an alternative history angle to more talking about my own experiences. Talking about my own experiences and then imagining a world that's more accommodating of my unique autistic challenges. The podcast's still going to be called Autopia, and it's still going to have the main focus of imagining a world that's far more accommodating for autistic people. However, I'm not as passionate on the alternate history angle as I used to be. When I first conceived this podcast, it was December 2023, and I was home for the holidays watching a crime drama with my mum. It suddenly came to me, I don't really know why. And yeah, I was certainly more interested in alternate history back then, but I feel like my passion for it just isn't big enough such that I can bring out regular episodes, because admittedly I am a university student, and university is frickin' hard. But yeah, I'm bringing out these episodes way more scarcely than I'd like. I would like to perhaps upload them like once a month or so, and the last one was in July of last year, and now it's March of this year. So yeah, it's not that that's strictly a bad thing, it's just I don't know, I just like this show to be more regular, and I've kind of in a way lost my passion for alternate history. Not that I don't dislike it by any means, it's just that I think where my passion is at now is more kind of talking about my own experiences. So I want to at least temporarily, maybe not permanently, but at least temporarily, shift the focus of this podcast to that. Basically, talking about my own experiences, or some of your guys' experiences, if you want to send in your own experiences. And maybe I could have some of you on the show even, and we could imagine a world by myself or together, which is more accommodating of those and what it will be like. Another point to make is that I've been very shy about having any kind of social media presence or online presence for this podcast, and that's because I struggle with social media use myself. It kind of adds a lot more. When I had personal social media accounts, it seemed to add a lot more detriment to my life, especially when I realised it. I went through some difficult personal experiences which really highlighted that, and around the time that this podcast started, and around the time as well, I started seeing a lot of creators on YouTube talking about how they deleted social media and how beneficial it was for them. And I'm not 100% sure on this yet, but I'm thinking of trying to find a way to help build a community for this show online while also making it sustainable for me. I haven't figured out the steps to do that yet, but I do intend to. And I know this kind of announcement may have come out of left field for some of you. It might be a bit of kind of an unstructured announcement. It is unscripted after all, like completely unscripted. I'm gonna have to edit a lot of this out. But yeah, I do plan to make an update episode explaining this in more detail. So I will do that. I thank you guys for listening, and I will see you in probably that update episode, and then we will move on to episode 4, whatever episode 4 looks like. I don't know. The podcast is probably going to be from a different angle, at least for now. To reiterate, I'm kind of moving away from the alternate history angle and more towards personal experiences and hopefully experiences of you guys too. I'm looking forward to it, so I'll see you then.